Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome to Money, Sex, and God, the weekly podcast, Facebook Live, YouTube series that we have going on over here at Essential Reclamation. I'm Genevieve, and I am really looking forward to introducing our guest today. I'm going to have him actually intro himself, but before I do that, I just want to let you know what we're going to be talking about, and he'll give us some more info. We're going to be really diving into sexual deviation and perversion and letting ourselves talk about the things that, you know, go untalked about, go unnoticed. And the reason I love that we have Cadell on today is that he's going to be taking his knowledge and his philosophies around this. And we're going to be playing with, you know, the knowledge of it and the pleasure of it and the feelings of it together and see what we can create. So without further ado, Cadell, I'd love if you could intro yourself, please.
Sure. Yeah. Hi. Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me on. Just a second. I'm just going to share this to my Facebook group when I've done that. So, yeah. Thanks for having me on. I am a philosopher and an anthropologist by training. Actually, my main interests have always been like evolution, and specifically evolution about the human species. Why did we emerge the way we did? What makes us different than other organisms? And what does this knowledge mean for our future? And so, like, really, my whole intellectual evolution has been about our difference from nature. And then if we, my logic was, if we understood better our difference from nature, then that would give us a better sense of where we're going in the future. And then the more I moved through academia, I felt like the more I confronted personal questions and the more I became interested in personal questions, because I sort of came to the realization that academic knowledge oftentimes is disconnected from the personal, is disconnected from the emotional. And that's actually very beneficial when you're studying planets and when you're studying, other organisms, or when you're studying, things not to do with human beings. Even if you're studying like archaeology or the past or something like that, you don't want to get too personally wrapped up in that, because you want to try and get an objective understanding. But then the more I was focusing on like my real life experience and what my knowledge meant for my present, the more I just brought my attention to personal problems. And so that, is in some sense maybe why we're connecting now, because where my knowledge is and where my focus is really on problems like money, sex, and God, and sexuality as one of those concepts really sticks out to me as something that is so fundamental to being human, so unique to the human experience, and at the same time something that is often not discussed in its full essence. Yes. And I guess that's where I would like the conversation with deviation and perversions to go, because I would say that, the normative picture of sexuality, of something that emerges when we're teenagers in puberty, and we get a sort of, genital concentration of energy, and then that genital concentration of energy is organized between two sexes which are opposite to each other, and then those two sexes try to unify into something which would last over time and reproduce the species. I think we all, almost spontaneously, intuitively come to some sort of like picture like that.
Right.
But at the same time, it really leaves so many areas of sexuality undiscussed. And I don't think there's anything wrong with, like, inherently wrong with like that picture, but like it's more the consequences of that picture lead us to not discuss the other things.
Yes. And not being fully in the range, right? One of the things that I've been playing in for the past however long, couple decades, has been, how can I take my sexuality and then go around and find the darker edges, the places that, are unmet by the light, where where can I move and explore that, and what's going to come out of that. And what I've found is that if I allow myself to really dig into those spaces, like deeply dig in, pleasure almost always comes out.
Right. And so when you dig into the darker edges of sexuality and pleasure comes out, is it difficult at first and then it becomes pleasure, or is it pleasure immediately?
I've found difficult at first and then pleasure. In my work, I find it the shadow, right? I call it the shadow. So first we have to find the shadow. Once we find the shadow, then we can dig into the shadow. And then actually what I do is rewire the nervous system to find pleasure in that shadow. That's the basic of the work I do, right? Is this like kind of what you, tell me.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, that's lovely, because I love thinking about this, and like trying to articulate sort of a knowledge of this process, because like what it brings to mind is what I always found really strange was, you know how infants struggle to eat?
Right.
You know, they always put up a fight. You know, like they're like, I always found that remarkable, right? Like that, you know, you almost have to force the food into their mouth.
Uh-huh.
And of course they're so picky, and like almost the parent's job is to expand the child's ability to consume different types of food. Like it goes from like just the breast milk to like mushy food, to then you diversify further. And I was just thinking that like, that this is how pleasure works, that of course the like there's many, like I find food exceptionally pleasurable, but when I was an infant, no, I remember putting up a fight, pitching a fit at the dinner table. Even if my mom proposed a dinner that I didn't like, I would say, I'm going to go away from home and I'm not coming back for dinner and stuff like that, as like a protest. And I was thinking that this is in some sense like a mechanism of pleasure, is that you what is first unpleasurable becomes integrated into becoming pleasurable. And so that actually, like, I think if like this is some sort of mechanism of pleasure, it actually gives us a very useful way to explore sexuality, because I think one of the reasons why a lot of people don't explore sexuality, not just because there are taboos and like moral blockages or moral coverings over sexuality. I think that those moral coverings are like defense mechanisms that were put in place by historical culture for logical reasons. They're not just illogical, you know, because like sexuality has its dangerous aspects, especially if you don't have protection, especially if you don't have you know, a good knowledge of you know, emotional knowledge or intimate knowledge. But that people don't explore sexuality as much today because they're not aware that this, what is first unpleasurable, can become pleasurable. And so you could have an encounter with something unpleasurable, and then you could say, I'm not going to do that.
Yes.
You know, and then you could say that hurt too much. And so because it hurt too much, then I'm just going to keep a safe distance from it.
Right. Right. This is where I like to get into couple dynamics, right? Because when you start partnering up with someone sexually and you find that the person, whatever they're into, whatever they're turned on by, it's not working for you, right? It's like this chemistry isn't quite clean. And what I've noticed is a lot of couples at that point will say like, oh, that's not pleasurable for me, so I'm going to go find someone else. And I've always said in my work, and I've seen this, that chemistry is something that can actually be very created. We can neurologically wire pleasure to whatever your partner's pleasure is. We can dig into that and find that. And then what's really cool, and I think you'd be interested in this, is what I've seen that happens is that when that rewiring happens, the person who's gone through that process of owning their shadow, claiming their shadow, finding the pleasure, now has a stronger container to hold their sexual experiences. And I notice that they tend to be calmer and more capable of kind of grounding on the planet. And I don't know, like energetically, that's what happens. They're able to say, well, if I can do that, I can kind of hold everything. I can have all of this.
Right.
Which is pretty fascinating to look at. And it makes sense for me, like that the nervous system expands through pleasure, and then boom, now they can just kind of experience anything, which is the way I live now. is very much like, no matter what happens, I don't care how painful it is or how scary it is, I'm going to be able to find pleasure in it. So bring it on. Right.
Would you say that the expansion comes from pleasure or pain, or the interaction between the both?
I think it's the same thing.
It's the same thing.
Well, I mean, I get that it's not, and
no, I mean, when you were putting the advertising for this, you said you're the feeler. So I mean, and so I mean, I'm gonna take your the way you express your the words for these experiences seriously.
Yeah, I think it's more, I think pain or suffering, so to speak, comes from not fully experiencing whatever the moment is. And so if you're fully experiencing pain, if you're letting your body really be in pain and you're like allowing it in, then you're actually in pleasure. It's like a really deep cry is actually pleasurable. A really deep scream is actually pleasure. It's the part that's not pleasurable is when we're going, I don't want it, right? And we're running away from it and contracting.
Well, I think the only distinction I would want to maintain is, of course, if you put your hand on a hot stove,
right?
Like I think there's like a distinction between, putting your hand on a hot stove and like experimenting with a difficult, intimate space. Maybe,
yeah.
And or like, I'm just saying, like, there's I think there's an important distinction here because I think on an evolutionary level, pain is a sign of threat. Like, if you're experiencing pain, it could be that you're in a situation which puts your survival in jeopardy. And I think that the weird thing about the pain in sexuality is that when you experience pain in sexuality, your life is not in danger.
Right.
Like, so that's interesting, but like we react as if we had just stepped on something burning and that could threaten our existence or something like this.
But if we didn't? Like, what if we didn't react? Like, what if we could teach our bodies to, let's say something, like, let's talk about, I'm just going to go into the world of BDSM and kink for a second, right? Where sadomasochism exists.
I'll accept this trajectory.
Okay, great. And what if, there's a painful experience of, I don't know, being spanked, and you have that painful experience. What if you can actually teach your body and your nervous system to be calm and in pleasure in the face of that? Like, this has been my experience, is that what that does is allows the body to say, actually, there are no threats. And then the general peace of that human, right? The general ability for them to just relax into themselves is like amazing to watch. Now, I'm not saying that, putting the hand on the hot stove example, maybe this person could also adapt themselves to not flinch. Like,
okay, but the only issue is that they're like, I'm definitely not someone who reduces our experience or our consciousness to biological reality, but at the same time, there is a limit where the body would disintegrate, and then the continuity of your consciousness would be gone, at least as far as we know.
Right, exactly.
So I do think there are physical limits which are some sense evolutionarily informed, but what I think what you're doing and what you're pointing out, and what I'm very interested in, is this pushing the limits of what we think are limits. So it's instead of I was at a conference where they said, instead of limits to growth, the growth of limits.
Yes. So, yes, I like to call it my pleasure ceiling, right?
Right.
I'll hit a ceiling and then I go to the next. Yeah, go ahead.
But I think we should be very sympathetic and very knowledgeable in this space of what the other's limits are, and we should take them seriously. Like, it's not, there are people who have different limit thresholds, and it's not like, and there are people who have different needs, which are informed by different histories and are informed by different childhood experiences, or informed by different certain sexual predispositions, and I mean, I think those should be taken seriously, but at the same time, for the people who are like, I feel like there are a lot of people who are like, I want to dip my toes in a little bit of the water out there, and I think, you know, it's basically like, what are the edges of your experience that you want to push a little bit? And I think this knowledge is really essential, because there are some people who are like, instead of dipping their toes in the water a little bit and going out a little bit step by step, they just like throw themselves into the middle of the ocean, and then they're drowning, and then they're like, I shouldn't have gone into the water at all.
Yeah. There's two theories that you're playing with here that I like a lot. One is the theory of titration, which in pleasure, we're always titrating. It's easy. Like pleasure growth and expansion should feel easy. If it doesn't feel easy, we're actually going to contract too much after the expansion. Our nervous system is going to go into fear. So it's easy little wins. When I work with my clients, it's like little bits. Like if someone's learning, say they want to work on their, let's just play with the BDSM example, and they want to expand their masochism tendencies, I'll give them like a little, like take a rubber band on your wrist and snap it once and then celebrate. Like it's not a big thing. You start really small. That's one piece that I love that you were pointing out. And the second one is just the concept that I think the reason this is so important, and why in my lifetime this concept is so important, is that a lot of people, because of painful experiences in sexuality, now feel that they are broken and cannot step out of that. And there's a reclaiming here that gets to happen that I've seen over and over. I did it with my own sexuality, where every painful experience I had, I reclaimed it into be actually like my biggest turn on. And that's huge. Like then you get to be superhuman. I feel like it's getting toward like the ability of superhumanity.
No, I totally agree, because it's very interesting. Like when I was just in my sort of what I would call like scientific abstractions or something, I was very interested in transhumanism. I was very interested in artificial intelligence and expanding consciousness to become superhuman, and all this type of stuff. And the more I reflect on this stage of my life, the more I thinking that these people who are transhumanists are actually disembodied. And they're imagining some, with just purely their imagination, this place of being superhuman, but it comes in the space of the division with their body. And actually that the more their spirit becomes embodied, the more I think they'll realize that it's actually the sexual libidinal energy which needs to be integrated in order to push the frontier and push the boundaries. And I here have very concrete empirical example of this. One of the leading transhumanists, and most people probably know his name, Ray Kurzweil. His and anyone who doesn't know can look up Ray Kurzweil. But his fantasy of becoming transhuman and his fantasy of going into what he calls the singularity is in fact that he would be able to experience a multiplicity of different sexual identities. And so, but this is purely a fantasy in his head, and he thinks maybe I'll act this out in virtual reality. But the crucial thing is that when we have sex, and this is a Freudian point, is that it's not just two physical bodies, but two physical bodies with their virtual desire. So sex is in some sense a virtual mediation already, but it's just that we need to have the courage to embody this energy, which is already with us, but we don't have the knowledge, and we're not taught this knowledge in universities. We're not taught, like, you could go to any PhD doctoral degree, it doesn't matter. None of these degrees will teach you how to do this, obviously. So like, you know, it's kind of like we are real experimenters and explorers of this real, which has no already well-developed knowledge structure. We're sort of developing the knowledge as we go. And this is why I think like we are, like there's this common notion that we are born too late to be explorers of the world, you know, like Copernicus, like we're going out into the world and we don't know what's going to happen. And we're too early to be explorers of the cosmos, like going into another galaxy or something like that. But I think that we're explorers of the frontiers of the mind in a way that, and the relation with the body in a way that previous generations never had the ability to do. And it's just as emotionally invigorating and exciting as anything else you could want.
Yeah, I thank you for so brilliantly putting exactly what I do in my work. I've never like been able to market myself well enough, but that's it, right? So this spiritual disembodiment, I'm bringing people back into their flesh and their experience and their play. Thank you. Right. I was like, oh, damn, that's what I do. And you mentioned that piece about expanding into the cosmos and being explorers of the world. I would actually add that through sex, that's exactly what we're doing. Yeah. Because sex can bring us into the cosmos if we want. And sex can also bring us into deep humanity and learning the differences of our humanness, depending on where we want to go, which is why I think it's that transmutation that happens sexually that I don't think we find with any other energy. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's the fundamental energy, and so that's where I would like to maybe struck or divert the conversation into like where we started. So because we've got this normative picture of what sex should be or what sex is, and it's, I think my belief is that it's remarkably persistent and universal, this picture. Like, I don't think it's just Western culture, or I don't think it's just like, I think that all humans experience intense emotional fear and jealousy when it comes to sexuality and adulthood being expressed outside of a certain pair bond. And I think all humans experience some emotional difficulties with the temporality of this bond. Because you can have, for example, the classical or the archetypal meeting between two lovers, and this, all of a sudden you meet the one, and then you have the problem of how does this pair bond persist across time. And of course, most times either it leads to a breakup or you stay together, but there's there's a lot of emotional resentment or problems with individual growth or personal development and stuff like this. So I think it's remarkably universal and persistent. But the interesting thing that I think is identified at the start of psychoanalysis is that, in fact, sexual energy is primordial to the infant. And sexual energy, not only is it primordial to the infant, but it only becomes concentrated in the genitals in puberty. And before it becomes concentrated in the genitals, it's sort of expressed throughout the whole body. The whole body is a surface. And like basically what is talked about is like every orifice where there's an in and an out of the body is a space to explore libidinal energy.
Yes.
And this is how infants, without any shame or guilt, explore their body and the sexual energy. And then the idea is that when this energy becomes disproportionately concentrated and enjoyed in the genitals, then we actually get a psychological reaction formation of neurosis or hysteria. And this psychological reaction formation is where adults come from. Instead of asking where do infants come from, like we always ask, where do infants come from? Right. But it's, where do adults come from? Like, what are these strange entities?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, I'm a mom. I've watched my son. He's 3, and he gets it. He gets play. He gets sexual energy. He gets sensation. He understands what feels good and what doesn't feel good. And it's not hard for him to understand that. And then we look at adults and it's like,
I think adults, because they don't understand this energy, I think they numb themselves.
Yes, 100%. And this is where, by the way, I see in my clients, this is where porn addiction comes in, like really big, right? Because the energy gets concentrated in the genitals through this reaction formation that you're talking. Thank you for that, because I didn't know that's what was happening. And then they're stuck, right? There's a stuckness. And so the work with porn addiction is to move it through the body and get the energy circulating through the fingertips, through the toes, exploring like every orifice. And then it will dissipate out and not be so addictive, right? Which is pretty neat to watch. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, and so that, I mean, that opens up a much broader horizon of what sexuality is. And it also sort of brings us into spaces of like where are the boundaries and the limitations of sexuality? And when you have this conception of sexuality, it very much seems all pervasive and unbounded and kind of everywhere. It's not like you can identify, like, it's almost like the limit of this energy is the limit of the self.
Yes.
And that's very interesting, because one of the things I'm starting to think more and more is that when philosophers throughout history talked about the self, they were talking about a non-sexual self.
Yes.
Which means that they're not talking really about the interesting core location of the self,
right?
Which is really this expansive horizon of, and it's actually the location of the primary motive drive, and like and when people, I think, locate motivation outside of this energy, I think that that's a repression. Like, I think that I don't think that they really understand what their motive is. They've repressed their actual motive.
Boom. You're hitting it, right? Like this, and I've seen this over and over again through the years with clients, that the self is, I mean, sexual energy, in my opinion, is kind of everything. It's creation, it's destruction, it's me, it's you, it's the world, it's God, it's everything all at once. And so if we're in denial of that energy within our own physical body, then we're not really alive. And I've seen this over and over again, like, we're not really alive. And then people come to me asking, what's my purpose in life? What's my mission? And they can't find it without their sexual energy first, right? That's like the starter of everything. And it's also
probably also the location of their most fundamental fear and terror.
100%. Because it's the same thing, right? Like, I'm playing with them now as the same place. Like, let's dig into that. I mean, the way that I've seen it is, the more that we can fully experience fear, terror, sadness, rage, whatever, your sexual energy is just going to expand way more. And then what happens is sex becomes not about sex anymore.
I love that.
It's not intercourse. It's not orgasm. It's literally just beingness.
And I think this is what I'm interested in. Is I think it's a type of pathology, the type of pathology of like this, I guess, what is often expressed in forms of jealousy and envy of what is ultimately sexual intercourse, or like, the conventional image, that the image of the two people having sex itself. And I think it's because this energy is so often just concentrated in this area, and we don't know how to unblock it and distribute it throughout the body. But I think that the more people become like spiritual, the more people become spiritual, the more that the more that people are inherently emotionally polyamorous.
Yes.
Like, socially and emotionally, people are polyamorous. But then the problem is like, as soon as this emotional and social polyamory reaches a level of the sexual intercourse itself, it's like all the destructive bonds everything gets sort of messed up and destroyed here. So it really is, I feel like we're walking like it's almost like this is, to me, the singularity is like walking in this space is like, how do we get to the other side almost of this genital concentration? Because because I think it's so explosive a bomb, this knowledge, because I think that like whenever like take for example economic or ecological problems, like nobody knows what to do with global economy and global ecology and stuff like that.
Right.
And I think that it has to do with our lack of knowledge of the libidinal space, because we're all isolated individuals.
Yeah.
And we don't have community anymore. We don't have real authentic social life. We don't have we don't really understand how we could possibly reconcile our individual insanity with social normativity. And so I think that the job is actually, when we explore the space, it comes with a tremendous amount of responsibility to change basically the foundation of human civilization. Because if you look at the foundation of human civilization, say for example, people say it's a patriarchy, right? Well, patriarchy instantiates a certain forms of regulation and law, which allowed for civilization to exist the way it does. And okay, these laws and regulations don't serve us anymore. So of course we want to deconstruct them, but at the same time, we need to construct totally new ethical practices or whatever for these spaces, so that we can help everyone expand their limits, the growth of limits, or something like that. But at the same time, the possibility, the danger of irrational conflicts is so high, but at the same time, the opportunity for real human interaction is also so high. Yeah. So this is, to me, the real.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have this theory that patriarchy, one of the reasons it was put into place in the first place, was a reaction to sex, right? A reaction to like, holy, this is huge and powerful and terrifying. Let's do something to clamp it down. And it feels to me the destruction of patriarchy comes from all of us, not just women, but all of us reclaiming sexuality, and that there will be no room anymore, right, for anything else. And that's kind of what.
Well, it's even interesting. Like what I'm interested in is like I'm very sympathetic with deconstruction, but at the same time I'm very interested in understanding where certain constructions came from. So, like for example, take for example the at a marriage ceremony, you have a man, a father, walk the daughter down the aisle to the other man, passing her off and of course, okay, we have to deconstruct woman as property or whatever. But where does this come from? It's like you have a precious object, which the whole world revolves around. Right. Like literally the whole social world revolves around.
Yep.
And you have to be very careful. You have to be, and the weird thing is, for the human subject who is this object, you don't even know what you have. Right. Like, you don't even know how precious. You don't even, like, you're carrying the world, and you don't even, So all these rituals are so fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, and that's so. What I found is that sexuality is ignited. Sexual energy on its own, and I'm gonna get feminine masculine here, which pisses a lot of people off, but here I go. Sexual energy is inherently feminine, which means that, and then the man is the responder to that sexual energy, right? This is what I've seen, that she's in her essence of being is the sexual igniter, and he's the responder. So of course, a marriage ceremony is going to be, let's hold this precious orgasm. This is basically what's happening. Let's hold this and make sure that it doesn't explode. Like, let's figure out how to make it look like, put it in a box so that we can just own it and claim it later, right? And it's
to possess the object,
right? And then and she's going, well, I don't even understand what I have right now. Like, this is weird. I also think you were getting to the point of sexual energy, like of connection, right? Of that kind of that, nowadays we don't have that. We don't play in connection anymore, and that's one of the big reasons why. Obviously, why sexual energy is so important. And to add to that, I think what sex does is it reminds the other person of who they actually are. right?
Yeah.
So if we're getting that mirror, we're getting that feedback, then we can operate, ourselves can operate around the world with this inherent knowingness that we wouldn't get without that feedback of our true nature, which is the libidinal energy, the sexual energy. So
well, that's why Esther Perel says people cheat.
right.
She says, Esther Perel says people cheat because they want to not, it's not some evil act. It's the person is trying to reconnect with a part of themselves that they lost.
Yes, exactly.
So I think that that's really important. The interesting thing is that, so I just want to engage with your theory of sexual energy for a moment, and put it into conversation with my reading of psychoanalysis, because Freud famously said the libido is masculine, and
All right, Freud.
well, of course, but I want to put it into conversation with what you're saying is that sexual energy is feminine, and sort of see if we can have a productive sort of like theoretical here idea, because so he said that the libido is masculine, and he said it's sort of like this penetrating energy, you know, and then the woman would be the receiving energy. Or what becomes woman is the receiving energy. And he said that men become neurotic because they don't know how to direct their penetrating energy. Like, it doesn't seem like, basically he said they don't know that he said they don't think there's an object that is capable of receiving the energy.
Right.
And then they said women become hysterical when they are bombarded with this energy and they don't know why they're being bombarded with this energy, or something like that. And or so this type of relationship. But at the same time, as I have gone deeper into the tradition of this knowledge, like there's a lot of emphasis on the mysteries of what's called feminine jouissance, which is feminine sexual enjoyment. And I think what's called jouissance, feminine sexual enjoyment, is what you identify as this painful pleasure.
Yes.
Like, or this pain, or this pleasure in pain. So that's what, this is what has become known as beyond the pleasure principle. So you'll have pleasure, which is just this, like you're sitting on the couch eating whatever your favorite food is or something like that, or just something, basically what is like the demarcation of your comfort zone, and like the pleasure bubble, like this bubble thing, which, as we already when we started the conversation, we said this bubble, the things which become internalized inside this bubble are first painful, right. Like the baby eating the food, and then it internalizes this and it becomes pleasurable. But the limits of the expansion of this bubble are at first painful. And I think that the mystery of female jouissance is that it acts as the container for this expansion or something like that, or it has the potential to be the container for this expansion or something like that. I don't know, but it's just very interesting, because it's sort of like, if the feminine sexual energy is like a receiving energy, then the limits on the expansion of the male sort of or the masculine more penetrating energy are some sense determined by the container, the capacity of the container for the receptivity. So it's like, at the end, it's like a dynamical interplay.
Yes.
With of an expansion and a receiving, or something like this. And I think that this is the mystery of the perversions and the deviations, and that what the normative picture is. The normative picture, what it does is it demarcates a certain boundary, which is like explored territory, or something like that. Like, this is the territory we've explored. We know that we can explore here this region. It's like it's been mapped out, and we have different concepts which will, guide us in mapping out this territory. But then what become deviations or perversions are things which are not yet mapped out. We haven't yet understood what they are, and they're not yet explored territory, or something like that. So, but at the same time, the 20th century was an explosion of perversion and deviation.
Right.
which has then become, I think there's a dialectic between the perversion and deviation, and then it's retroactive normatization. So for example, like 80 or not 80, like maybe 50 years ago, homosexuality would be seen as a deviation, as a whatever, some perversion. Yep. And now it's been fully sucked up into our system. So it's no longer a deviation. It's now accepted as a normative behavior. And so I think that whenever we're thinking about what sexual energy is and its expansion is, precisely these spaces of perversion and deviation at the moment are the future of normativity.
Yep. Yes, and that's so much that you just said, and I kind of want to wrap it up into one thing I was feeling, one main idea that I was feeling, which is, okay, first of all, like on a visceral, the reason I hate the masculine feminine conversation is because it just keeps looping back around. Because in what I've seen and in my experience, masculine feminine is really the same thing, just like different sides, right? It's a polarity. Different sides, yeah. Yeah. So what starts what? Who knows? What I have noticed is that there is a subtle cue that the feminine energy gives, and then the man acts. And that's something that I think might be missing in, not to diss on Freud, but there is, for example, can I just use us for this? Because this is a really good, you're very masculine.
Oh yeah, go for it.
Okay. So I don't know how you found me, but you acted on my subtle energy somehow. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. And then from there, the penetration of, we're going to do this. This is what I want to do. Here are the notes. And I receive it. And I decide in my body whether it's a yes or a no. Right. So it was a perfect interplay of masculine, feminine energy that I think is missing in a lot. That can be a whole other live, but people don't really play in that the way that I think we need to. And then the other piece with this perversion thing is that I think, so I like to imagine it like this, like, the masculine is penetrating, the feminine is actually the one that goes, hey, here's what else there is, right? And she does that through her sexual energy. Here's what else is here. Where else can we expand? Where else can we go? And he goes, okay, right? Which is also what culture does, right? Culture is doing the same thing. It's like, let's penetrate what we already know to penetrate, and then someone deviates. And then that's a very feminine creation energy. And then we start to manifest in that alignment, which is funny that I'm now the personification of that with my work, right? I have become the one who perverts, which is an interesting experience to be living in, that, it's kind of tricky to sleep at night sometimes, that I am that now. As I'm taking what society does around sexuality, and I'm saying, no, there's more, right, and I'm ready to live in it. And then we'll see who penetrates, right? So, but the same concept. So just some things that came through that felt like I wanted to land them there before we
right. Well, I think it's like, for me, what you were saying is like, I totally agree with you as femininity as basically operating on these subtle cues, markers, then the masculine picks up on. So like, for example, like, if you take, for example, the entire fashion and the entire makeup industry, these are like subtle cues, like, and many times not so subtle.
Not so subtle, yeah.
Right. So, but the entire industry is based on that. And like, for example, it was something I originally thought when I was really younger. I was in a gender studies course, and I wasn't able to say this, but the idea stayed with me, and I want to keep developing it, because what's interesting is, if you study, for example, like, there's a funny paper on the dynamics between the egg cell and the sperm cells. So in common understanding, the egg is sitting there passively and the sperm are actively penetrating. But in actual reality, the egg is actually sending out chemical signals.
Yes.
And the egg sends out chemical signals, and then the sperm only know where to go when they pick up these chemical signals. So the egg isn't just passively sitting there, it's an active passivity, because it's there sending out signals for the sperm to locate it, and the sperm don't know where to go unless they pick up those cues. And I think that the same thing, I think that the same thing happens with men and women, like in terms of fashion, in terms of like the way they present themselves in public, in terms of way that the appearances operate.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I think there's all sorts of, and I don't know, a few people have told me I'm not very good at picking up these subtle cues, because sometimes someone will say, you know, she was flirting with you, or she was sending cues at you or something like that, and I was like, I didn't pick up on that at all. Uh-huh. But I think this is always operating, and I think it does need to be made more explicit, as it's sort of like the form of it's the dynamical interplay.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is, like, I think in the authentic interplay itself, the fact that it's going on can't really be brought to consciousness. That's why I think it's kind of unconscious. Yes. Like I think that the play itself is unconscious.
It is.
And I think it's kind of good that it is that way. Let me just give a quick joke of what I always say for this dynamic interplay. There's a joke from Seinfeld where George is taking a date home, and the date says, would you like to come up for coffee after the end of the day? And George says, I don't drink coffee this late at night. And then she looks disappointed, and then she goes up to her house and locks the door, and then George is left there, and he starts hitting himself on the head, saying like, coffee didn't mean coffee, coffee meant sex. All right. But she was leaving an indirect cue.
Yeah, there's a mystery that's a mystery that it works, right? And I think, I mean, so just to kind of wrap, because we have to wrap, but I could talk about this all day. I'm glad that we're going to do another one of these. June 3rd, is that the next one?
Yeah.
Okay, great. But I get this a lot with clients where, for example, the man will have erectile dysfunction, right? This is very common. And all the pressure's on him, right? Like, do the thing, like get the thing going. And what I work on is I actually remove the man from the situation at all. And I get her embodied in her sexuality. I get her having her own pleasure running through her body, like rippling through her skin. And then that cue is there so that he can then respond and penetrate, right? I've seen this so many times that it's right? So there's something with the female sexual energy that, for whatever reason, women aren't fully claiming it. And it's disrupting the natural polarity, I think, that we can start playing in. So
yeah, but I think this is so important and so crucial, because I've had a few conversations now of people say that what the dominant discourse of feminism is more of a masculinizing force.
Yes.
And that it disconnects women from their femininity and their own sexual energy. And then it kind of does lead to a situation where the man is kind of aware of his sexual desire.
But he doesn't know where to go, right? It's like
he doesn't know where to go.
Right. He's like, where's the egg, right? He doesn't lost, right? I don't know where she is. And so our job is, I mean, me being in this female body, I know that part of my job is to just be fully a woman. That's basically my job. I don't work. I don't think much. I just be. And then,
you know how in trouble you would be in universities if you said, my job, you said, imagine if you went into a gender studies course and you said, wait a second. You go into the course and you say, my job is to be a woman. I don't think. Like you would be like immediately enemy number one.
Shot down. I know. I went to university for psychology, and I got in a lot of arguments. But my body feels better with this energy. My body, and that's, for me, it's always a guiding. And this is what I teach women is like, where's your guide? Because it's a female guide is within her body. It's not from her mind. And once she knows that, I mean, and we have varying degrees. We're not, I'm pretty masculine in I just am, like, I'm probably 70, 30, 60, 40. And so I have varying degrees of this, but when I want to be in my feminine, I'm in my body and I start there. And that's how I get to manifest, right? Which is very different from the masculine manifestation current. So we could do a whole other thing on that. But
yeah, I mean, I'm sure we could go on many tangents.
Yeah.
But I do feel like, yeah, just to wrap things up quickly, I do think that we did, like we were able to touch a little bit on maybe what are deviations and perversions of the normative picture. And I think maybe like the two important points is like understanding this relationship between pleasure and pain, which of course you explore, and sort of understanding sort of how this functions to both inform a limit and to expand a limit.
Right.
And then also this idea that what were once perversions and deviations are later norms.
Yeah. And it can be in the body and on a societal level, right? And we kind of hit that, which is pretty amazing. And then not like the sky's the limit, right? We get to play, which is always what I want people doing. So when are we talking next? Just to tell people, do you remember? It's June 3rd.
Yeah, June 3rd. And just, I'll give a quick plug that my next big project is I'm doing an online course on the Freudian unconscious. And what I want to do with that is I want to demonstrate the way knowledge of the unconscious can help us to talk about the future of civilization in a new way. Because I really think the discovery that there's a part of our psyches which has a knowledge which we're not aware of. Mm-hmm. Like it's the best definition for me of the unconscious is a knowledge which doesn't know itself.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I think that when we know that there's a knowledge inside of us which doesn't know itself, but we have to become aware of, I think that this helps us to approach conversations of sexuality, of truth, of creation, of immortality, of what's inside of us that we have a spontaneous, unconscious knowledge of. Yeah. And so that's what I'm trying to achieve with this course. So if anyone's interested, there's a link on Genevieve's page.
Yeah, we could totally do a whole thing on how to get to the unconscious through sexuality. That's a fun discourse we could have too, because that's delightful. Thank you so much. This was so much fun. I'm glad we're doing more. Really, really delicious. High five. Good work. And everyone who's watching, if you have questions, you can type them in. We will answer them when we can. But I hope that all the viewers enjoyed. I'm sure they did. And Cadell, really great talking with you. Appreciate it. All right. Have a good one. Bye.